And let me tell you, you can get away with a lot more stuff on country radio stations in South Carolina than you can on Fox News. So, but it's good to see my old friends Karen and Mark Rotterman. And I first heard about the John Locke Foundation many years ago from them. And y'all do great stuff, and it's good to be here. You know, when you're talking about national security and keeping America safe, you can never take anything for granted. Never take anything for granted. Never expect the expected. The story is told of Thomas E. Dewey, who back in 1948 was favored in all of the polls to defeat then-President Harry Truman. Well, on Election Day, with the latest polls out predicting a Dewey win by almost landslide proportions, Dewey went to his wife and gave her a blank check and said, honey, today I want you to go out and buy the most expensive lingerie that money can buy, because tonight you are going to bed with the President of the United States. Well, she did. And you know what happened? The polls closed, the early returns came in. It didn't look good for Tom Dewey. It only got worse. Well, by about midnight, Tom Dewey realized he had lost the presidency, and he heads on up to his suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And there in bed with all her new, beautiful lingerie on, just staring at him was his wife. Well, Tom, she said, is Harry coming over here or am I going over there? Never expect the expected. Well, I tell you, we do live in a world on fire. And the reason we have a federal government, the reason the states came together in the first place is to keep the country safe. That's why we have a federal government. Everything else is secondary. And this president, not only has he inherited a mess, but he has inherited what I call the most complex foreign policy and national security situation a U.S. president has ever faced. And he's inherited it with a military that has really been decimated over the last 8 years. You've got to go back to pre-World War II times to find a smaller United States Army. I think Vice President Walter Mondale, one of the last of the Harry Truman Democrats, was right years ago when he said anyone who claims to be an expert on North Korea is either a liar or a fool. But he said back in 2006 that then President Bush was not tough enough on North Korea. And the fact of the matter is, both Republican and Democrat administrations kicked the can down the road and did not do the things that we needed to do to deal with this threat. And it is a very real threat. One of the things that I'm a big believer in is something called open source intelligence. Sam Wilson, the late former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, said it best. He said, you know, there's so much stuff just staring us in the face that we don't get. He said, we need fewer James Bonds and more Sherlock Holmes. In 2012, I was the first person in the United States to reveal that the Iranians were on the ground in North Korea. Did it with Bill Hemmer on Fox, and we wrote a piece about it. How did I do it? When you do a search on Google, it doesn't give you everything. It only gives you the most popular searches. I went to a university that had 1,300 search engines and 1,000 processors and had them do a search in Farsi. Guess what we found? Local Iranian newspapers with pictures of Iranians on the ground in North Korea, helping them with their ballistic tests, their missile tests, you name it, had never been reported in the United States before. We open source intelligence. We've got to do a much better job. There's so much stuff really just staring us in the face. What does open source intelligence tell us today? As of last Wednesday, we know that at least three Iranian nuclear scientists were on their way to Pyongyang. The significance of this is, historically, almost every time there has the Iranians have gone over to North Korea. And oh, by the way, in 2012, they actually entered into a technology and science agreement between the two countries that didn't get picked up for a long time either, but was news in other parts of the world. But the thing about it is, we know historically, almost every time that they've gone to North Korea, just a few weeks later, guess what happens? Some sort of nuclear test. And here's the concern. The real concern is that both Iran and North Korea have the nuclear design package of the infamous Pakistani scientist, Dr. A.Q. Khan. And there's a race going on. And that race is, when and will they be able to get a nuclear warhead on an ICBM? I'm not surprised that they had a successful launch of an ICBM last week. I actually wrote an article for Fox back in 2012 talking about what they did then. They took a Unha-3 rocket, which uses the same delivery system of the Type-of-Dome missile, and they got a satellite into space back in 2012. So we should have known way back then that they were getting mighty, mighty close to having an ICBM. Our intelligence has got to be spot on in dealing with this threat. And I'm glad to see what the president is doing, trying to put more pressure on the Chinese, trying to get Putin to help out, and he could if they wanted to, with China. When I was on Fox the other day, they asked me about Putin. They said he's sly. I said, yeah, he's sly, but he's also a thug. But you know, we have a president from Queens, and I think he's dealt with a few thugs before. So anyhow, but I think he's doing the right things. He has very limited options. But what we're doing, we're going to see more and more of these types of missile defense tests. The latest THAAD test will probably take place within the next 2 weeks. And THAAD is historically good for short-range, medium-range ballistic missiles. This will be the first test against an intermediate-range ballistic missile, simulated attack of a North Korean ICBM. The other system that can take things out in space is the GDM, the ground-based system that we have up in Alaska. Historically, the problem with that, it has not been as accurate. But the last several tests, including one in May, were spot on, so it's getting better. But you're going to see us doing more and more things like that. It's really a dry run, a test. And then also the things you saw with the B-1 bombers this weekend involving the South Koreans and all, you're going to be seeing more things like that too, from an interoperability standpoint. Which brings me to cybersecurity. We know that the North Koreans actually have a quantum encrypted device. Now what is that? Quantum computing is billions of times faster than computing as we know it today. And there's a race going on right now. And they were also sending out random number generated codes, okay, to some of their so-called spies as a signal in South Korea. Did y'all ever see the movie The Imitation Game? Remember that? And how the good guys broke the Enigma code? And if you remember, every night at midnight, the Nazis would change the code, send out the first message at 6 o'clock, and the good guys had 18 hours to crack the code. And then they do it all over again and had to build a machine to beat the machine. Well, what if you were changing the code on these computer codes every couple seconds? And what if you put it on a chip? It'd be the most secure computing in the world, and it would be almost impossible to hack. And there's a race going on right now. And the United States, quite candidly, our National Security Agency and others have not taken this serious enough. Our Air Force has, our National Institute for Standards and Technology has, and they're probably more in the forefront on this. There's a number of things. First of all, you have to distinguish between the different types of cyber attacks. Distinguish between what the Islamists do and what the Chinese do, because each requires different countermeasures. The Islamists are more about sabotage. They're trying to take down our systems. The Chinese are more about espionage. They're trying to steal stuff. This is inflicting great harm on this country, not just from a national security standpoint, but from an economic standpoint. Every year, we lose more intellectual property from our businesses, our universities, and our government networks than all of the intellectual property of the entire Library of Congress. It is inflicting great economic harm on this country. One of the things that I think we've got to do, and that's a real problem, is this. It is it's a recruitment problem. James Gosler, who was a big NSA and CIA expert who's looked at this for many years, he said that we need probably 30,000 true cybersecurity experts in America to thwart the worst kind of attack on this country. We've only got about 1,000. So in my book, and since, I've been calling for the establishment of national security scholarships. Let's get the best kids we've got here in America to go into data security and computer security. That's how we're going to get the kind of brain power that we need to win the cyber war. But it is, I would say, as I've said, the most complex national security situation that this country has ever faced. Radical Islam is the challenge of our time. I think King Abdullah of Jordan said it best when he said it is World War III and a war within Islam itself. And I am one who, I knew King Abdullah years ago when he commanded the Jordanian Special Forces, and let me tell you, he's the real deal. And we need to work more closely with people like King Abdullah in that part of the world. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, he came to our Congress and complained that he wasn't getting the things that he needed to take the fight to ISIS and the radical Islam. Well, you've also got King Mohammed VI of Morocco doing great. I just wrote a piece for Newsmax last week about the things that he's been doing in the war on terror and breaking up cells and actually going and helping break up cells in Europe with the special forces units and all. So, and what's interesting, both King Abdullah and King Mohammed VI of Morocco are both descended from Muhammad. Those are two men we need to be working more with together, and they're on our side. Something is going on in these mosques. Why don't we have, go back to that mosque outside of Washington, D.C. We had two of the 9/11 hijackers went there. The imam was Anwar al-Awlaki, who went on to head al-Qaeda in Yemen. Nadel Malik Hassan, the Fort Hood terrorist, went there. What if just one person had come forward with actionable intelligence of what's going on in that mosque? We might have been able to save a lot of lives and thwart a terrorist attack.
Who would listen?
Huh. That's why I've been calling for a rewards program. Encourage people in the mosque to come forward with actionable intelligence. And again, we've got to think outside the box. Things like that, I think, would be a big help. The FBI had actually intercepted 18 emails between Nadel Malik Hassan and Anwar al-Awlaki and basically did nothing. And plus, they had all kind of complaints from the guy's fellow officers, too. Political correctness is killing us. It is literally killing us. The other thing I've focused on a lot is how do we turn the tables and use social media. They've been using social media to kill us and recruit. How do we turn the tables on them? I've been advocating what I call a situational awareness hotline. Let me tell you how it would work and how I got the idea. Do y'all remember Anders Breivik, the guy in Norway that killed all those kids on that island? Well, a friend of a friend's daughter was there, and she was hiding in the bushes. And she could hear that guy breathing. That's how close she was. But she had her iPhone. She had her phone. And she was able to get out a tweet to the local community what was going on to come help us. And local people were able to actually get there and help those kids before law enforcement got there. And I started thinking, how do we do something like this? How do we harness the power of social media and turn the tables on them? Border security. I know Robert Mueller is in the news a lot these days. Well, let me tell you, he was also in the news several years ago when he was the FBI director. And he testified to Congress that I think it was in 2012, there were 59,000 people apprehended illegally coming across our borders from countries other than Mexico. Countries that included Yemen and Pakistan and Syria and Iran. Let me tell you, those folks were not coming here as part of a church mission outreach program to America. They're coming here to do harm. And that's why, and that's not counting the ones who had Middle Eastern names. And Mueller testified to this. Middle Eastern names and had changed them to Hispanic names to try and fool authorities. Securing the border of this country is so important and has got to be a priority. How do we do all the things that we've got to do and not go broke? I call it victory without bankruptcy. How do we, and it's a challenge. I tell people, go back and look at it historically. And what I said at the outset, the reason we have a federal government is to provide for the common defense. That's the main primary reason we have a federal government. In 1960, 52% of all federal spending was for national security. 52%. Today it's down to 16%. It's not national security that's bankrupted America, it's all the other stuff. And, but there are things that we can do, that we can do a much, much better job and be much smarter about in how we buy things. I like what the president did with that fighter aircraft and all like that, but you know, he can't get involved and engaged on every single contract deal that has a cost overrun. Between 2001 and 2008, our GAO documented that there was something like $300 billion US in cost overruns of existing programs. Why not have a mechanism in place and change how we do contracting, where contractors are rewarded for coming in under budget and ahead of schedule, as opposed to tacking on new things that a program manager always wants. We need to look at that. Also, your service secretary, Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Air Force, belong to the Defense Acquisition Board. Get them more actively involved and let contract managers be able to make decisions at an earlier level, and get them working with the Office of Management and Budget at the beginning to get the things that we need and as cost effectively as possible. And there's a number of things that we can do there. Better use of our National Guard. We can train roughly 3 or 4 guardsmen for every 1 active duty soldier. It's one of the best bargains that the American taxpayer has ever gotten, and it goes back to the founders of this country who believe in a strong citizen soldier concept. I'm reminded of what Edward Gibbons wrote, and he said that about ancient Athens. He said, in the end, more than they wanted freedom, they wanted security. They wanted a comfortable life, and they lost it all. Security, comfort, and freedom. When the Athenians finally determined not to give to society, but for society to give to them, when the freedom they wished for most was freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free. Will history one day say the same for us? You know, after 9/11, this country came together like I hadn't seen it in my lifetime. That we resolved, be Democrats, Republicans, you name it, that we would do whatever it took to keep America safe. We need that same kind of resolve today. It's been a real pleasure being with you here today at the John Locke Foundation, and this time I'd like to open it up for any questions you might have.